Well, I cannot speak for all Israelis. Like everyone else, we're individuals with our own history, our own mindset. But I will answer maybe as a person living in the diaspora at the moment, in the existential loneliness I have been experiencing here for the last 2 weeks. I think that most Israelis realize that our history has brought us to Israel, as it did my great-grandmother and my grandmother, both fleeing from persecution to the only place that they knew that may be safe for them as a religion, as a nation. Neither of my grandparents or great-grandmother were religious people. They were simply looking for a place to peacefully raise their children, make a living, and enjoy life like everyone else in the world seems to be able to do. And Israel seems to be the only place that could, as best it can, give solace, give a sense of unity and community, and a sense of we belong here. Because as we see, it is hard to belong anywhere else.
I'll surrender.
¿Qué puede pasar? Ya no pasa nada. Una vida de mucho cambio, pero mucho cambio causado por mí. Salud mental, bienestar, salud física, emocional, a través de testimonios.
I'll surrender.
Surrender es aceptar la realidad.
Welcome, everybody, to one more episode of Let's Surrender. For those of us who know or don't know who we are, I am Natalia Schlesinger, and this is my beautiful business partner and soul sister, Brana Weinstock. And Let's Surrender is, for its most part, a well-being and mental health awareness platform where we aim to provide tools and context about the hardships and just beauty as well of being human. So today we have a very special guest. We will be talking about a very difficult yet important topic. And so, Amit, before we begin with our conversation, we would like to formally invite you to introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about yourself.
All right, shall do. My name is Dr. Amit Oren. I have been a psychologist in private practice for over 35 years. I started as a forensic psychologist, worked in prisons in Israel and here, and then became a clinical psychologist. I'm a clinical professor at Yale University, where I supervise the psychology fellows at the Yale School of Medicine. I am a mother. I am a grandmother. I love traveling. It's my passion. And most recently, I have become involved in volunteer work with Ukrainian refugees and Gold Star families. I have joined an extraordinary group called Mountain Seed Foundation, who was founded by American veterans who themselves have been through the horrors of war and have founded this organization to help heal themselves and find redemption, as well as help others heal as well. In 2022, we did the first Mountain Seed Foundation Healing Base Camp in the Austrian Alps. That's where I'm going towards this kind of work.
Thank you so much for that brief introduction, because we know you're such an interesting woman, and we could go on and talk about your history all day. And I think that's what we're aiming to do on this hour. So we want to go ahead and start by asking you to tell us a little bit about how was your background growing up, and where were you born, and what was your upbringing like?
There is a quote I would love to use by a poet named Rukeyser. She said it in a poem in 1952, and it goes, "The universe is made of stories, not of atoms." And so the narrative, the collection of stories, including my own, is an important one to tell. I was born in Israel and lived there till I was 11 years old. I was born and raised in a town called Kfar Saba. This town was built and started by my great-grandmother, Shendel, who herself fled from Ukraine in 1914 with her 8 children.
Wow.
They wandered around the world and thought they reached safety in Israel. They lived peacefully among Arab and Jewish families. There were only 12 Jewish families in Kfar Saba at the time. My paternal grandmother, 20 years later, fled from Nazi Germany, or what was beginning to be Nazi Germany, in 1933 with her 2 sons, my father and his brother. And they, because they were not allowed into Israel at the time because the British were occupying, lived in Lebanon for a year, in Beirut, where my father learned French, and ultimately were given permission to go to Israel. This is where my parents met. My mother is Israeli born and fell in love, and I'm the product of that. My life in Israel as a child was idyllic. While we lived only a few kilometers from the Jordanian border, there were times of peace. We valued our Arab neighbors, and they valued us. I used to go with my father to pick wildflowers around the border. At the time, it was allowed. Now it is against the law, and rightfully so. And sometimes we would go so far that we would come across a sign that said, "Stop, danger, border ahead." And my father and I would turn with our bounty of flowers and go home. My family in Israel, after arriving, experienced trauma upon trauma. My father, like every Israeli, fought in several of the wars. And every year he was part of the reserves, and every year for 40 days, he would take his rifle and disappear. We didn't know where he was. We didn't know if he would come back. It was times of peace most of the time, and he came back, I'm happy to say, happily. Unfortunately, since then, several members of my family have been killed in war, one in the Yom Kippur War, and exactly 20 years ago, a part of my family, last name is Almog, also the same last name as the people who were recently slaughtered in Kfar Aza, next to the Gaza Strip. My mother's cousin, who was like an uncle to us, was an admiral in the Israeli Navy. He was the longest lasting admiral in the history of Israel. His name was Ze'ev Almog. By then, he retired in 2003. And he went to sit in a restaurant in Haifa, where he lived, because that's where the Israeli Naval Academy is, where he taught. And he sat there with eight family members. A terrorist walked into the restaurant and blew it up. My beautiful admiral relative was killed. His wife and 3 other family members were all killed. 4 were maimed, injured, blinded, including children. What is quite ironic, and I say ironic with a heavy heart, is that 2 weeks before the massacre in Israel currently occurred, the man who is another relative who lives in Kibbutz Aza presided over a memorial service for this family, where all of my family attended to honor them and what they have given for Israel. Merely 2 weeks later, they too were slaughtered. That was the trauma part of my life. When I was 11, I moved to the United States with my parents. Wasn't my choice. I wasn't happy. But I've made a life here. I've gone back and forth to Israel all of my life. I have lived there, worked there. I ran a rehabilitation center for prisoners there for several years. Ultimately returned to the States because that's where my parents lived. I don't know how much more you want to hear. I've lived a long time. I've got a lot to say.
I love it, and I think it's very every single part of your story is as important as the next. And thank you so much for sharing this brief part of who you are and what you've experienced. I was thinking, some of the questions or one of the questions that we had thought about asking you was, when would you say you first encountered the concept of war and pain and loss? And I find it appalling and interesting, yet not surprising, that this seems to have started pretty much as you were born, which is the reality of every Israeli citizen who has ever lived, right? So maybe asking the question of when did you first come across the concept of war would be, well, maybe from before you were conceived, which I also think is the reality for a lot of us as Jews. I think that is what we are faced with and sometimes gets lost in translation. So that was the question we were going to ask you, but I think the question has answered itself.
I have a lot of friends that are not Jewish that, because of this war, this actual war, they've been asking me a lot, how do Israelis love living in Israel and at the same time have to be part of the reserves and have to do the army, and what's the mindset of the Israeli people, and why are they willing to give their lives up for their country? And I know how to answer that question, but I've never lived in Israel. I have family there and I have friends there, and I would go in a second to Israel, but I think you can answer that better than I can.
Well, I cannot speak for all Israelis. Like everyone else, we're individuals with our own history, our own mindset. But I will answer maybe as a person living in the diaspora at the moment, and the existential loneliness I have been experiencing here for the last 2 weeks. I think that most Israelis realize that our history has brought us to Israel, as it did my great-grandmother and my grandmother, both fleeing from persecution to the only place that they knew that may be safe for them as a religion, as a nation. Neither of my grandparents or great-grandmother were religious people. They were simply looking for a place to peacefully raise their children, make a living, and enjoy life like everyone else in the world seems to be able to do. And Israel seems to be the only place that could, as best it can, give solace, give a sense of unity and community, and a sense of we belong here. Because as we see, it is hard to belong anywhere else.
Mm-hmm.
Completely.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree with you more. And I can only speak for myself. Israel is my home. Whether or not I was born an Israeli or was not born an Israeli, Israel is my home and the home of all of my family. We all have, it's a connection that I think for every Jew is undeniable. And in that same note, which is kind of where we wanted to take this conversation, is the experience of being a Jew and an Israeli in the diaspora, right? Not being in Israel in moments like this. We want to ask you if you can tell us how you've been affected by recent events in Israel, and what role has the fact that you are indeed a Jew in the diaspora played in this experience for you?
I'm going to take the liberty of expanding on this experience because there's a layer that most people don't have that I do. So as I said earlier, for the last 2 years, I have been working with Ukrainian people, mothers and children mostly, who have fled or have come to us to this healing base camp in Austria for the very same reasons. They too were invaded by a ruthless enemy who wants nothing but to destroy the country and annex it, as Hamas does in Israel, to Russia. When I first saw those images of the women and children fleeing, trying to get on trains, with children in their arms, dressed in coats, looking exactly like we do, my degree of empathy, my seeing my great-grandmother doing the same, became very pronounced, maybe for the first time for me. And at that moment, I knew I had to do something. And that something was to bring hope to these people who now have nothing except horror. I thought at the time that I represented hope. I went and met with these women. I joined Mountain Seed Foundation to meet with people and say to them, me too. It's a different kind of me too, but it's a me too. I also have a history of being butchered, murdered, raped, everything taken away from you, brutality. And yet I am here to tell you there is hope. I live a wonderful life. I love and I am loved. I think I am helpful to people. I think I'm productive. And until you can hold the hope, I'll hold it for you. And so with that background is what I enter a very personal time for me. It's been beyond incredible how the Ukrainian women I've helped and the group I'm working with now is holding me up. Human to human, different languages, different cultures, same trauma, little different, but holistically, let's say, similar. And I am telling myself what I told them. For the most part, I'm successful. As I said earlier, not being in Israel right now is painful. I am writing to people all the time. I'm writing to my immediate family members who are personally affected. Currently, 2 members of my family have been declared dead. 4 are currently considered missing or kidnapped. There are about 100 bodies that have not been confirmed via DNA evidence. We don't know really where they are. The greatest hope is their hostages. Imagine that as a hope. And so in that way, being far away is very difficult, not to be with them physically, to offer whatever support and help I can give. But it's also been difficult in the sense of not feeling that people here understand me. I have all kinds of friends. I've had Palestinian friends here. I have friends of all religions, all colors, I'm proud of it. But in this moment in time, I'm not feeling the love. I'm not feeling the unity. I'm not feeling the outrage for the massacre that has occurred. And as I said earlier, I know it's a big word, existential loneliness, but it's a big feeling, and it's an empty feeling. And I'm trying to do what I can with it, to raise awareness. The reason I agreed to be on your program is precisely for that. I know that you are watched by particularly young people, and I'm interested very much in speaking to those people because, you know, Hamas is not just Israel's enemy. It is the enemy of humanity, and any human being should be appalled, disgusted, and outraged by the atrocities that have been committed by Hamas. It is not equated with Palestinians. The best phrase I heard was, having empathy for Palestinians should not be confused with having sympathy for Hamas. I don't remember who said it. It was a statement in the New York Times, but it captures my sentiment very well. Our enemy is Hamas. They victimize the Palestinians like they victimize everyone else. Any organization that calls itself freedom fighters, but uses their own children, women, civilians as human shields, is not, to me, freedom fighters. They're not resistance. They are basically savage cowards.
Mhm. Completely. I think one of the things that have affected me, and maybe we can share this point of view, is also that the wars you mentioned before were wars where technology wasn't as advanced as it is today, right? So one uncle of mine, he was a soldier for the IDF, and he was telling me when Yom Kippur War was, we used to listen to the radio in the morning and in the afternoon, and that was it, right? We didn't have this access to actually go to on social media and see news every 5 seconds. And then people also talk besides their friends, not in social media, behind the screen and anonymously. So the hatred wasn't as big as it is today. And today, what is happening also, it's a social media war, no? I had to erase Instagram app from my cell phone and then put it back on, and I'm at war with myself with what should I actually look at the news or should I not? But then the comments are horrible, and then these like anti-Semite wave has woken up. So this has been actually frightening. Like I really haven't felt so much fear in my life as I did these past 2 weeks.
Completely.
Yes. Yes. As I said, the atrocities committed against Israelis are not atrocities against just Israelis. They're atrocities against humanity.
Mm-hmm.
When 9/11 occurred, no one came out writing on social media, I sympathize with both sides. When George Floyd was savagely murdered by suffocation by a police officer, no one said, well, he tried to buy cigarettes with a $20 counterfeit bill, as if justifying the murder.
Mm-hmm.
People were outraged. Somehow this seems different. And I don't understand how humans are not able to distinguish between terror and army. What I would suggest to people, to young people on social media, I've never been on Facebook, by the way. I don't have an Instagram account. I don't participate in any of that for a variety of reasons, mostly around my professionalism, but also because I don't believe that's the place to get the news.
Mm-hmm.
I think that before anyone reads these opinions on social media, they need to take a 15-minute history lesson to understand what's happened in the Middle East in particular. You don't have to go that far back. You can go to the beginning of this century and understand that Hamas was elected by the Palestinians as its governing body. You chose, you got rid of Fatah, you got rid of Arafat. He and Sharon were on the cusp of coming to a two-state solution, on the cusp. And then a right-wing Israeli assassinated Rabin, and everything fell apart.
Mm-hmm.
And then Hamas took over and began to govern the Palestinians, who I consider, as I said earlier, victims of this terrorist organization.
Mm-hmm.
And if you read about what Hamas does to its own people, you will more easily differentiate between history and fact, and all of these pro-Palestinian movements. You know, before October 7th, I was one of those people who spoke about the plight of the Palestinians. Because I'm educated, I'm an academic of sorts, I pride myself on ideals of equality and justice for all. But since October 7th, I have had to talk to myself in harsh terms about differentiating still between the Palestinians and Hamas and what the Palestinians actually want. Most of them want the same thing Israelis do. Hamas is not going to let them have that. Israelis want to live in peace too. Imagine coming from the history I come from. My family has endured war after war, terrorist act after terrorist act. All we want is what most humans want: to live in peace, to enjoy the land, to eat well, to have good conversations, to cultivate education, all of good things that every human is entitled to. And as long as this continues, as long as terrorism is allowed to exist, this will not be possible. in this world.
I could not agree more with what you just said, and I certainly can. You know, something you said has stuck with me very, very much, which has to do with this vacuum of terror and loneliness. Kind of, we're experiencing this as something that, and you said it so beautifully, you know, it's like a vacuum over there. And it's very easy for us over here to be in this echo chamber of opinions and who did this and who did that. And we're forgetting that this is not a vacuum, that this is about human lives, and that this is happening to me and to Brana and to you and to everybody. And so I wonder what this experience of living this, for lack of a better word, as a vacuum of loneliness here in the diaspora, not in Israel, not in the Middle East, how do you think that's affected your mental health?
As I said, for many people, for Jewish people in particular, I'm sure Palestinians who live in this country as well, it's brought up a multi-generational trauma that's in our DNA that we are most of the time not aware of.
Mhm.
But in these situations, suddenly rises to the surface like a puff of smoke that interferes with your ability to see straight. I am walking through life now feeling like I'm trying to decipher a fog. I'm not functioning as sharply, as clearly as I usually am. I am struggling between containing a variety of simultaneous emotions: rage, fear, anger, trepidation, anxiety, uncertainty. We always, as humans, experience all of these emotions, but not so distinctly and usually not all at once. It's very confusing. All of us, I imagine, I know I do, have some inner conflict about the morality of it all. And this is a point that I want to make that I think is very important. I don't think that both sides of this war have moral equivalency. I don't think Hamas has the moral equivalency, or any terrorist group, of people who are using an official army to defend themselves. I think that humanity and every individual needs to really take a moment and understand that while we may not like the idea, there is evil and there is good in this world. And some wars are not equivocal in that way. World War II was not morally equivocal. We knew who was evil and who was good. The war in Ukraine now is not equivocal. We know that the Russian forces are evil and the Ukrainian defense is good. It is the same situation with the Israeli IDF and Hamas. One is good, one is evil. One has come into a country and slaughtered people as they were waking up from their sleep. I want to add something here that I found the most poignant thing I heard in the past 2 weeks. What I didn't know and discovered is in a kibbutz called Be'eri, which is another kibbutz that was infiltrated by the terrorists. They lived very, very close to their Palestinian neighbors and saw the plight of these Palestinian neighbors. This kibbutz always had a fund and would raise funds on a weekly basis to give their Palestinian neighbors, because Hamas has taken all the funds and used it either for their own bank accounts all over the world or to buy more ammunition. The hospitals in Gaza, the utilities in Gaza were not in a state of almost collapse because of what happened 2 weeks ago. They were in a state of almost collapse 2 weeks ago because Hamas takes all the money and uses it for its own vicious purposes. So imagine the kibbutz, whose 10% of the population was just butchered, burnt, raped, kids beheaded. They had fund for their Palestinian neighbors. And now you tell me what's good and what's evil.
Mm-hmm. And also, I feel as humanity, we need to open our eyes and really think about this. Today, people in Israel are butchered by terrorists, innocent people, right? Not even soldiers, innocent people that were sleeping peacefully in their homes. I think we all have a right to sleep peacefully in our homes. But regardless of that, today it's Israel. But tomorrow it's the next country. And tomorrow the next one. And tomorrow America. And then terrorism is not just pointed at Israel. It's pointed at all humanity. And I do believe that the worst thing we can do as humans is think that we're separated. We are not. We are a species and we're all connected. So if this happens to our people in Israel, it's happening to us. Terrorism can't be acceptable for anyone anywhere in the world. It doesn't matter how connected you feel to Israel or not. You're human and you're watching people get butchered and killed in their homes and they're innocent. So why are you accepting this?
Correct.
Yeah, that is truly the ultimate question. You know, when ISIS beheaded 5 people on television, it was the first time that Americans finally got it. Oh, these are people who are really ruthless butchers. And what's happened to ISIS since? Mostly gone. Because the world woke up and said, we cannot have these people in our midst. Hamas has taken on the same brutality. They have now printed out booklets that have been found on Hamas terrorists, on their bodies, giving very specific instructions, taken after ISIS instructions as to how to mutilate people in the most vicious way, to butcher them, not to make a point, not to do anything, but to wreak havoc and hatred. Mm-hmm. What is it going to take, as you said, for the rest of the world to wake up and say terrorism cannot be part of us as a humanity? Exactly.
Mm-hmm. And I feel there's a little it's a little bit complex. It's not, but it is at the same time, which is part of what's happening on social media. You can be sympathetic because we all are sympathetic for the victims because they are victims in Gaza, right? But at the end of the day, we need to finish with terrorism because if we don't, the victims in Gaza will still be victims in Gaza and more victims will be added to the terrorist cause. And that's what we really can't ignore.
Mm-hmm. And I think on that note or question, which is something that I'm very interested in, and it has to do with this specific, so the impotence of seeing people around us, whether that be in Mexico or in the United States or in Israel or wherever we are, and seeing this rage and this hatred towards the world, and then lack of empathy for some and excessive sympathy for others is very confusing. And as you say, it provokes these emotions of rage and hopelessness and these kind of very dark emotions that, as you say, we all experience as human beings, but it's rare or seldom do we experience them all at once and with this intensity, right? And I'm curious about, I mean, based on the work that you do and based on the concepts about, you know, kind of how do we, as Frankl said, you know, grab this pain and make it into purpose. How is that working for you, if it's working at all in this moment in time?
Viktor Frankl's ideas, his sense of meaning and purpose is what got him through the concentration camps alive. His entire family was killed in several of the camps, but he saw a vision of himself in the future, standing at a podium, lecturing to students. As he walked across the concentration camp, that was the vision that held him. I think it's a vision of purpose, meaning, but it also encompasses hope. And I think there are a couple of things that we can do for ourselves and others. I think we need to hold on to hope with dear life. I think hope, resilience, and community are the things that help us get through these times. When I work with Mountain Seed Foundation, it is exactly what I teach, are to use how to cultivate resiliency, how to cultivate hope, and how to build a sense of community around you to help you get through these very difficult times. Amanda Gorman, the poet, said, "Hope is not a promise we give. Hope is a promise we live." To be a beacon to others is what I try to do in my better moments, when I have hope for humanity. To have a sense, to maintain a sense of purpose and meaning is to think about it in terms of the future. I want to read a poem by Picasso that I love. I'm going to read it because I don't want to mess it up. Picasso said, "The meaning of life is to find your gift. The purpose of life is to give it away."
I love it.
He sure did that. I'm trying to do that. As a positive psychologist, because that's the kind of psychotherapy I practice now, I've been through many different, I've been on many different roads in terms of psychotherapy and what I do. Positive psychology is where I ended up, because I think in these times, it is to look at our own strengths rather than our weaknesses and cultivate them that gets us through. It is also trying to shed a light on the strengths of others and help them illuminate that will get us through.
And also, Amit, before we started recording, I think you said something that it's taken me 30 years to understand, and I think it's really difficult to understand. Sometimes emotions that we don't necessarily like, we have to embody them, recognize them, and feel them, and let them pass through, right? But before we start our healing and before we start our whatever you need to tap into, maybe it's time for us to feel overwhelmed, to feel angry, to feel rage. Whatever feeling is coming your way, you need to embody it and let it pass through, and then you can start to look at your strengths and start healing.
Yes, although some of it can be an overlap, so it's even more complicated. It's not
It
so,
is.
it's not so sequential.
Mhm.
I think that the most difficult part about practicing positive psychotherapy is to have the finesse to know when the patient in front of you needs the space and room to feel all the terror, all the fear, all the anxiety, all the uncertainty, all the grief. And when it is time to begin to work with that towards a lighter way of being, a better sense of functioning, it takes finesse, and usually the person themselves know when they're ready to do that.
Mhm.
I speak about emotions like this, emotions that grip you. Anxiety, fear of uncertainty is a human emotion that's really, really very difficult to live with. We're always living in a time of uncertainty. September 10th, 2001, we were in cafes, we were at the movies, we were watching TV, we were, giving our children breakfast. It was a time of uncertainty, but it wasn't conscious.
Mhm.
The next day, it became very conscious, and all of us became afraid and uncertain and anxious.
Mhm.
The time didn't change, but our awareness of it has. Uncertainty is the enemy of humans. Humans seek certainty like they seek sex and water.
Yes.
It's that basic.
Or more.
Well, I don't know what's more. People don't seek more than sex and water, generally, that I'm aware of. But I think that we're right now living at a time that certainty is, because of what you and I just said, because it's a crime against humanity. All of us are affected by the images and horrors. We're not all that different than anyone in Israel who was affected. We're all human. They're all grandmas and grandchildren and babies, and all of us are human in this way. So the sense of being attacked, even vicariously, we feel that.
Mhm.
I think that it is important, like you said, to be able to sit with the various strong feelings we have.
To not suppress them, right?
Absolutely not suppress them, because feelings that are suppressed act like a jack in the box.
Yes.
You push down, and what happens is, by surprise, it shoots up like a volcano without you being aware, and that will bite you worse.
Yes.
The idea is to sit with whatever you contain and understand one thing. Your emotions are not you.
Mm-hmm.
Your emotions are like clouds above your head. They are there. Sometimes they're very dark clouds. Sometimes they're light and fluffy. Sometimes you can see both kinds.
Mhm.
You acknowledge them, you see them, but emotions like clouds will always inevitably dissipate into the horizon.
I love it.
They will never stay forever. You just look up. You can think of it as your own emotions,
Mhm.
and be sure you're not going to be stuck there in this right now turbulent cauldron.
Mm-hmm.
And I would say that That's probably a good way to describe it.
Mhm.
You're not going to stay there, but you need to honor those feelings that are appropriate to the situation right now and say, yes, I'm human. And this is how I feel in response to what's around me and what's happened in the world.
Mhm.
Be sure that those feelings will disappear. There's another metaphor that I like a lot. I'm borrowing it from one of the participants in one of the healing base camps Mountain Seed Foundation and I had this summer. It was a woman whose husband was killed at war, a young woman in her early 30s, maybe even late 20s. She had a daughter with her. She was devastated when she came to us. And she asked to give a speech the last night. She had been suicidal. She saw no sense, like most of us don't right now. What is this world all about? What is this? She had moments of losing hope as well and talked about suicidal ideation and asked to speak on the last night and said the following: the birds of fear and worry will fly above your head. You don't have to let them make a nest there.
Absolutely.
I like it.
Absolutely. And I think in speaking about this and in speaking of being able to embody these emotions and to, yes, see them as something that is fleeting, which is, you know, one of the concepts that Brana and I have actually discussed the most in this space, given that, you know, talking about feelings of anxiety and depression specifically, when it feels like it's going to last forever and when it feels like it will never go away. And then really putting things into perspective and understanding that even these emotions of terror and horror and anguish will dissipate with time. I am curious, though, about what you do to be able to tolerate those when they are existent.
Okay. I'll start with another phrase I like. You know, by now I like quotes and phrases because they stick.
They do.
Emotions are not directives. Emotions are signals.
Mhm.
When these kinds of times occur and people run to the internet and write hateful messages that continue this vicious cycle, think for a moment and remember that emotions are not directives. They should not tell you what to do. They should tell you the kind of state you're in. And that you do need to pay attention for, too. And I can share with you what I do and what I teach others to do in these kinds of very, very, very difficult times. Self-care is not, I'm going to read another quote to you, and I don't want to mess this one up either because it's one of my all-time favorites. In the healing base camps to these Ukrainian women who've been through hell and are not back yet, because our last group we brought from Ukraine and they were going back to Ukraine. They weren't refugees living in other places. I had a poster in my first group. The first group I teach is self-care. And there was a quote by a woman. She's a Black woman. She died in the 50s. Her name is Audre Lorde, Lorde. And she wrote, self-care is an act of political resistance. Caring for myself is not self-indulgence. It is self-preservation. And that is an act of political warfare.
Wow. Wow.
So for all of us who cannot go to Israel and fight physically, it is our responsibility to take care of ourselves, to keep ourselves in optimal condition, both physically and mentally, because we're needed. We're needed by ourselves. We're needed by our neighbors. We're needed by members of our synagogue. We're needed by our community at large. That is the first thing, and a variety of ways to do it. One of the things I do is that I believe that nature heals.
I do.
And the reason the healing base camps are conducted in the Austrian Alps, it's because it's a mountaineering camp. The kids are climbing mountains, and I take the mothers on walks. They are called all walks, AWE. It's a well-known concept in the field of positive psychology, where you get two bonuses at once. You get to walk, which is an excellent physical exercise that dozens of studies now are pointing to its efficacy in addressing depression and anxiety both, and often better than any medication on the market at the moment. Being in a beautiful place, walking along the ocean, a forest, a field of flowers at sunset, there's an extra bonus called awe. And awe is a feeling that lifts your spirit. I believe awe is a result of two things happening simultaneously. You feel really, really, really tiny in light of what's around you. You know, if you're standing in front of the ocean or a mountain, you feel minuscule in front of it. But at the same time, being in nature, you feel a sense of belonging to something bigger than yourself. That is a sense of awe, and that provides a spiritual lift. I take a walk like this in the woods every day. I shut off whatever news I'm listening to, because I know I need to refuel and refresh, because I'm running on empty from the images I'm seeing. So that is one thing I do. Another thing I would highly recommend when we're living at such an anxiety-provoking time and a time of great uncertainty is to stop for a moment, sit, and ask yourself a very simple question. What's here now? It will bring you back to the present moment and all that it contains. It's a good place to be, because the past will usually be filled with sadness, and the future, as your mind jumps from place to place, will be filled with anxiety. The present is a gift, and it will be more likely filled with greater calm than our ability to pass through time. So it's another thing I do. A third thing I suggest to people is our body and our minds work together in unison. Humans don't like cognitive dissonance.
No.
We don't like when our body is doing something else and our mind is elsewhere. So it's easier to work with the body because you seduce the mind
to come back to it.
So when you are feeling particularly vulnerable, particularly, as you said, helpless or impotent, you get up and you stand with your body in the Rocky stand, as he stood up at the top of the Museum of Fine Arts in Philadelphia. We all know the song, and we all know the stand. Feet firmly on the ground, hands in a universal sign of victory, and stand there for a minute. it will shift your mind. You will feel more powerful. You will feel strong. You will need that every day. I do it every day. And there are many more that people can look up that are small, little, helpful tools that help us get through the day, minute by minute, hour by hour.
Thank you so much, Amit, for those tips. I'm completely, I completely agree with all of them. Walking in nature is one of my favorite things to do. And also an extra, if you can hug a tree, it really recharges you. It seems hippie, but it works. But I'm really curious to ask you if, apart from all we've talked about this hour, is there any important message you would like to give out today that you think it's important for our audience to know?
Only 4 words. Good will overcome evil.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And we are, again, extremely appreciative of your time and all the vulnerability that you've shared with us today. We have one last question for you. And this is a question we ask all of our guests. And so the question is, what does mental health mean to you?
Flexibility of mind.
I love it.
Let me explain what that means. Human beings arm themselves with defenses from childhood on. The important thing about our minds is that we need to cultivate various and plenty defensive maneuvers that would be appropriate to different situations. Because if we only have a few ways to handle things, but the world presents us with many, many situations, if you only use the ones you know and you don't cultivate others, they will backfire in situations where they do not fit. So the ability to be flexible with how you approach the world in certain situations, the ability to sit with uncertainty. It's a very difficult to cultivate, but that is an essential ingredient today of a life well lived.
I love it.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for such a powerful answer. It's really curious because we've asked over 500 people the same question, and there's no answer repeated, no? And that just, it's amazing. We love asking this question. We would like to thank you again for your words, for you opening up so much with us and telling us a little bit about your story, and also reaching out to our audience and giving out so much powerful information. Thank you, listener, for getting till this place of the Talk with Amit. We really value your time, and we hope you get a message that's worth listening in this hour. We are here for all of you. RDM is open for all of you, and we send you a lot of love.
Thank you for having me, and thank you for giving me the opportunity to give my voice.
Thank you. Thank you.